on me and I didn't realize it. So anyway, back to where we were. We'll call this part 2 of the Polar Alignment on the LXD75 series for ManCave Astronomy. And basically, we've got our weight bar exactly north, and we're looking at our viewfinder, polar finder here, and this is a great opportunity. Let's see if I can get my, there we go. See the little white mark here on this ring? This ring has just a little Allen head screw in it that you can loosen up and turn that ring. And what you want to turn it to is to be in line with the long tail coming off of the cross, so you have a reference point as to where that tail is. And some of the videos that I've seen on YouTube, I'm gonna not try to get into too much of a tangent here about this, but some of the videos I've seen, they're talking about you need to align the long tail to the north, or basically straight up on a vertical axis, this, that, and the other. Well, I guess Meade in their wisdom has placed it to where most all of their alignment is done with the tail, the long tail off of the polar alignment cross southward. Basically straight down is where you align it to when you've got your telescope in the park position or the home position. So you just basically want to take and line that ring up with your tail, lock it in with your tail, so when you turn this, you have a reference point as to where you know where the tail is, the long tail coming off of that cross, just as a visual reference outside of looking through the viewfinder. Because at night it's pretty tricky to do all this in the dark, and you don't want to turn on a bunch of lights and everything else to mess up your night vision. So that was just a little tweak that I did that I thought just made things a little simpler. So anyway, back to where we were. When you look through, you now see that the long tail from the center cross is pretty much straight up. So now that we've done that, swing our mount back around, realign to the home position, lock it in, park the telescope as Meade calls it. You leave your top just like you had it so you can see through, and we are now aligned back to 0 and 0. The other reason why I told you to do that was you can see way down here that little white mark is very hard to see when you're on the bottom side of the polar finder, and it's not very much fun. So now we got all this set up. The one thing that you need to do and really take a lot of time on is aligning your polar finder to the head. And basically, like I said before, what that does is that centers your polar finder marks to the center rotation of the head. When you turn the head in whatever degree, you know, you can turn it 360 degrees. You want this to be at a centered point, and it's very tricky to do that. And what you want to do, and if it was daytime outside, I could open up the blinds and I can kind of show you what I use. But basically, there's a house right across the street. Focus the scope up, or the polar finder, right at the top of the roof pitch, and it had a nice, good, clear outline with the sky background in the daytime, to where I could focus right on the very tip corner of the house roof pitch. And what I did was, when you look through the 4 lines that are there, is basically you start out with the center, and you get the center where when you turn the scope 180 or 360 degrees, what you want to do is, when you look through that viewfinder, see if I can do this here. What you want to do is make sure that cross doesn't move. that cross stays in an exact centered position on a fixed object. And what that tells you is that your viewfinder, your polar finder, is locked into a central position in the head. So once that's centered in, when you look through it, no matter what position you turn, that cross will always be at a centered location. It's kind of like sighting in a rifle scope. In a kind of redneck, lameish terms. And believe me, it is very tricky to do. It's a painstaking process. It's a lot of fine tweaks. And these little Allen head screws that I put in allow you to make really fine tweaks with just your fingers, not having to fumble with Allen wrenches and everything else. And one thing that I did that I noticed through my painstaking tribute to try to align this thing was, once I got it fairly close to being spot on in the cross, was I took and moved the scope off to where the very far end tip of the three shorter lines aligned to the very peak of the house pitch corner, so I had a nice sharp object I could align that to. And when I turned it, I had to dial in to where I made sure that the far end of those lines hit exactly in the same position. And basically, out of blind frustration, what I did was when you lock down these screws, it shifts that image ever so slightly. And what ends up happening is you feel like, oh, well, now I'm all way out of whack again. I got to restart. Well, lock it in, get it close, lock them down, good and snug. And then literally what I did was I took and I bumped, just with kind of the palm of my hand, just kind of bumped the polar finder in whichever direction it needed to go once I was really close to being in center. And I was able to actually get it spot on. I mean, just dead on, just by just giving it a good bump, good firm, just a little bump. If it needed to be shifted this way, I just bumped it that way. If it needed to go down, I just bumped it down. If it needed to come up, just bump it up. And I actually ended up getting it locked in without having to keep messing with those little fine screw adjustments. It doesn't really hurt anything. You don't want to take no hammer or nothing and whack on it. If you bump on it and it doesn't move, then it usually means you've got your Allen screws a little too tight. So, but take your time, go through that process. That is a key to really making sure that your polar alignment is right. And now that you've kind of seen how what you need to do as far as using the clocks, when you go to do your polar alignment, it's going to be real simple. Maybe 10-15 minutes. Once you do it a few times, you get the hang of it. Once you get this thing really dialed in, your location needs to be the exact same position, and we'll go over that in another video on how to set this thing up in the exact same location. So it'll make the polar alignment a lot easier process as well. So once you get that dialed in, everything else is pretty simple. One thing that I did do was I downloaded an app on my smartphone, and it's called Polar Finder, and it's just a simple app. It was free. Go to your app store, put in Polar Finder. It comes up with the app, download it, and it makes polar alignment a snap. Let me go get my smartphone, and we'll come back and I'll show you how to do that polar alignment using that app. Sorry about that, my memory card filled up on me and I didn't realize it. So anyway, back to where we were. We'll call this part 2 of the polar alignment on the LXD75 series for ManCave Astronomy. And basically we've got our weight bar exactly north, and we're looking at our viewfinder, polar finder here, And this is a great opportunity. Let's see if I can get my, there we go. See the little white mark here on this ring? This ring has just a little Allen head screw in it that you can loosen up and turn that ring. And what you want to turn it to is to be in line with the long tail coming off of the cross, so you have a reference point as to where that tail is. And